All right. So, all right, here we are. It looks like you got the first one, Irvin, with the fingerprints.
Yeah, so this article basically is saying if we don't properly secure our fingerprints, uh, they're just useless. And a lot like our addresses and social security numbers, we can't really change them. So we really should put a little more focus on securing the data that is our fingerprints when we enter it into a service. Because once it gets breached and put out on the web, well, good luck changing your fingerprints.
Well, I'm not so convinced. I mean, I looked at this article and I've heard about this argument for a while. The point is almost nobody stores a photographic image of your fingerprint. They
Right.
get them some mathematical clues and they store that. And it's not that clear that they're all using the same system. So it's, anyway, also the fact that you can't change it, it should never be your only means of authentication. It should be one factor and two factor. And there, I think it's probably as good as an SMS, maybe better. So, I think there were some lunatics saying fingerprints are going to solve everything. And that's never true. But I think they're important. I think they're better than passwords. But anyway,
this is an interesting story, Irvin. A couple, probably 2 or 3 years ago, I went to a security and privacy talk in San Francisco that was given by this lady that used to be an intelligence officer for the NSA. Interesting fun fact here. So all of us who are teachers in California had to get our live scan fingerprints done. If you guys remember when you first started. Well, the fingerprints that go into that database, what they cross-reference is NCIC, which is National Criminal Database. All the government employees also have their fingerprints inside that database. So do we now. They actually do keep photographic copies of it. And she was telling us, that database has apparently been breached several times and the contents have been exfiltrated. So, I'm not so sure that there aren't full digital representations of our fingerprints out there.
Well, you could be right. Of course, now the way I got in that database, I was sure started teaching about 20 years ago, and they gave me a yellow piece of paper, a cardboard, and an ink. I took fingerprints, and then they handed the card back to me and said, okay, turn this in at the other building over there across campus. And I said, you're letting me do it? They said, yeah, we trust you. And I said, you just fingerprinted me, and now you trust me. They said, shut up, this is the system. And I said, oh, I guess so, but I feel bad about this system. Anyway, but I didn't grab some random guy and trade fingerprints, although I could have. Anyway, so they had mine, I guess. Well, that's good, clean fun. Anyway, all right, and I've got a bunch about Trump because I'm just amazed. Even in, this is just the gift that keeps on giving. And I ended up hopeful here. I felt really bad about the nation for a couple of years. I'm generally a Democrat, but it's so now he's just arbitrarily made this decision to pull the troops out of Syria without telling anybody and just let our allies get killed. And now the Republicans are speaking up against him. And I really think this is what Steve Lord told me. When Trump got in, I was very upset. And Steve Lord came over from London and I talked to him and he said, don't worry, this is the way it always is. He'll just do this garbage until his popularity falls, and then the Republicans will turn on him and tear him to bits. And that's what's happening. And the thing is, he's fired everybody who is like an adult in the room. So there is nobody that does anything but say, yes, sir, no matter how crazy he is. And this seems to be like a fundamental principle of power. Once you have nobody around you to argue with you, you just go nuts. So now in his great and unmatched wisdom, he will totally destroy and obliterate Turkey. And it's just raving madness. And it's so crazy that it gives the Republicans a chance to turn on him with some cover because they don't really want to get along with him. And this I thought was amazing because the one thing, I wonder why does anybody support this guy? And this is really impressive. This is the way taxes were in the 1950s and 60s. And then Ronald Reagan turned them into this. And then Donald Trump turned them into this. And that's just enormously different. And it's just shocking and amazing. And so, it makes me feel like Elizabeth Warren is probably right that we need drastic taxes on the rich, even to a level that sounds crazy. because we really are this far in the hole from where we ought to be. And anyway, this argument that made here in this article made me feel a lot better, because I actually believed exactly what he said here. I believe that 40% of Americans are complete lunatics. They are lemmings. They will follow Trump right over a cliff. They will never turn on him no matter what he does, because he's done so many things that seem terrible to me. But he says that is not true. He said that is 25% of the people are these Trump zombies that will believe anything he says, any lie he says. They read nothing but Breitbart and InfoWars and swallow all of that. And 15% of them are people who really aren't on board with all that garbage, but they felt like he was a little better than Hillary in 2016 for somewhat reasonable reasons. And they're probably not on board with this march right off the cliff, and we can get them. And it's looking like we might be able to defeat Trump next year. He might even resign by then, because now everybody's turning on him just today because of this military action. So it's incredibly fast. 2 weeks ago, Trump seemed to be invulnerable, and now like 68% of Americans want to impeach him or something. It's amazing how fast he's gone down. So maybe we won't have this idiot in 2020. I thought it was inevitable. I mean, I ended up on a hopeful note. But
I don't know. I'm not convinced that we're not going to end up with this idiot in 2020, but because, you know, one thing that boggles my, but who knows, anything's possible. It blew my mind that he came after Mitt Romney this week and started attacking him. That really surprised me. But what also surprises me is that there are a lot of people out there who will tell you this to your face. They believe that trickle-down economics works, and that's what's going on here, and that it's going to save the country. Which, you know, I mean, how do you argue with that? Like, where do you even start?
Oh, I could do it. I mean, I can't, like the people that are pro-cigarettes and climate deniers, and you claim all these numbers are fake, and the real numbers are something different. But people aren't inclined to do that. That's what I heard Morning Joe earlier, and I think he said the point is, you wonder why Republicans aren't even lying to support Trump. And the point is, he is so crazy now that they can't even think of a lie to support him when they want to. And this is what usually happens. This is the King Lear thing. I mean, a leader that's power mad kills off everybody, holds him back, and then he goes over to where nobody can stay with him.
I wonder, though, if the Republicans are avoiding fully denouncing him because it would lead to, or they worry that it would lead to an overall loss of credibility, for the Republican Party, which, you know, deservedly so. I just wonder if that's what's going on here.
Right, because they're probably thinking about themselves. Like, am I going to lose because I denounce him? You know,
exactly.
My people is going to go after me.
Exactly.
Well, I think no politician, more than maybe 1% of them, ever thinks about anything but themselves. And I was upset about that for a while, hoping for idealism, but I sort of got over that nonsense. And I think the point is, the American system is not one that's held up by idealists holding to principle. It's like the capitalist system. It's a system where a bunch of selfish people just trying to get political gain are pitted against each other in competition, so that should hopefully work. And I think it is going to work. And Republicans are not turning against Trump because they care about the country. They're turning against Trump because they see an opportunity for personal advancement by crawling over him to the top once he appears to be weak. And that will do. I mean, just a bunch of selfish people grabbing everything they can for themselves can work if the system keeps them balanced.
It's interesting how, like, this seems to be setting off a sort of a chain reaction, and like it does seem like the whole the card table under the House of Cards is a little bit wobbly. I did see something today about Betsy DeVos possibly facing charges.
Yeah, it is an incredible time. It's the most interesting story for months. It's just the collapse of it, and it's exactly like Richard Nixon. Everything happened in lockstep. And I thought the difference between Richard Nixon and Trump was the tapes. And Trump just handed over the transcripts. So he's just as crazy as Nixon. He records himself committing crimes and then hands over the evidence. Nixon fought like hell to stop them from getting the tapes. And when they got the tapes, he was doomed. Trump is nuts enough to hand them over, but it ends up in the same place.
Well, they're apparently doing an investigation into Pence too over calls to the Ukraine. So, boy, I mean, it's just interesting to see. Just interesting to see where this is going.
Yeah, well, Pence is their only hope after this. If they actually can't run Trump in 2020, they're going to have Pence because the Republicans already canceled their primaries. There is no chance of having a different candidate. It's just amazing how much they're all in with Trump, and he's totally not worth it.
I wonder what's going to happen if Pence goes down in that event.
Right. Open up a big old vacuum.
Yeah. Yeah. Well. So what's this?
Which, I mean, that would be okay. I mean, one of the things that concerned me really from Indiana, where Pence was governor, and it was a disaster. So
I know.
That was one of the things when people were advocating for impeachment. I'm like, So yeah, this is I thought this was an interesting story. And for the most part, I thought it was a very interesting story because of the amount of funding that's going into this. So some researchers at University of Arizona are working on developing a new cybersecurity protection system wherein it's modeled after the immune system in the human body. And basically, from what I got from reading the article, it's basically a fancy implementation of machine learning that will base protections on anomalous behavior patterns, etc. So just like your body, once a pathogen's introduced, your immune system kind of rallies and then protects you against that pathogen. They're sort of applying the same principle to developing a cybersecurity protection system.
Yeah, it sounds like a good idea, but the devil's always in the details.
Yeah. What I thought was really interesting about this, though, is they're getting like a few $1 million to do this, which, I mean, I feel like that's a sort of a new trend in this category, and that a couple of the big schools like MIT and Carnegie Mellon have had some programs to do this, but they've really been sort of alone on that island. This is the first I've seen of a big state school undertaking an initiative like this. So hopefully it's the start of a trend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know.
I mean, if we can get some of that research money for the community colleges.
Yeah, exactly. They're getting like a $3 million grant, and I thought it was interesting because it's from this agency that you never realized it existed, the National Nuclear Security Administration's Minority Serving Institution Partnership Program.
Oh my goodness,
that's quite a mouthful.
Yeah, well, if they're funding security, I'm all for them. All right, and I guess we're up to Irvin. Oh yeah, this Pentest problem. I remember this one.
Yeah, so this pretty much follows up that other article, the story that we talked about the guys who got into the courthouse and they got arrested and everybody's pointing fingers at each other. So this commentator wrote on 6 steps that best practices to avoid getting in that same hole.
Yeah, which
so like getting everything in writing, taking that paperwork with you so you have the physical proof, your dedicated point of contact so nobody points fingers at each other going, I don't know. Go further if you can, understanding what you're walking into and knowing your exposure, which are great reminders when you do a physical pen test.
It's all true for network pen tests too.
Yeah.
Cover. But it's definitely a good point. I remember when I did one and brought down the City College servers, and I didn't do any of this because I thought this will be harmless, nothing bad will happen, and it trashed everything. And then I said, I should have got that approval in writing. It occurs to me now. But thankfully, the network administrator did remember that he'd approved this. So I was okay. But yeah, it would have been better to get it in writing. So this is something you hear about now and then, but not that often. But I'm interested in the legal aspect. So this guy got hacked by this ransomware, and then he hacked them back and stole all the keys off their server and published them all under his real name. He's from Germany.
Oh, wow.
And then he said, I am aware of the fact that this is illegal. I said, well, no, I've been in this business a while. What you do is you talk to a lawyer before you throw everything out there under your real name, and they get a chance to save you somehow. So I know it was not legal from me. I said, well, you know, he might be all right. Like Google, when they hacked the government of China, that was also illegal. And if you go across, I'm not the bad guy here. Well, that's the problem. You might not be the bad guy, but you certainly committing a crime publishing results under your real name is a questionable legal strategy. But that's what he did. I imagine in practice, no one's going to press charges, but I don't recommend doing it this way. I've done a lot of white hatting and talked about it. This is not how you do it, unless you're crazy. But anyway, it's nice. He found the decrypter, so that might be something.
Yeah, I read something about that. I was like, okay, that's. I mean, not the best way to do it, but you are, you know, you get it. You're helping everybody by saying, here's the description keys. If you're stuck with it, here's how you'll be free.
I think maybe he read too many comic books as a kid like me. He's a good guy, but this is not the wisest way to be a good guy. Destroying yourself is not the wisest way to help the world. Anyway.
Right.
So Elizabeth, right, I saw this one, the guy in China. I think I have to.
Yeah, so I thought, one thing I thought was interesting was that this didn't get more press. It seemed pretty limited in the coverage that's going on about it. All I saw was, most of the stuff I saw was primarily local news sources. Yeah. It was a Chinese guy who was caught in San Francisco. He ran a tour company, and it was interesting because one of the things they noted in the article was they used like both modern and old school techniques. He was doing dead drops. So essentially he was leaving SD cards in certain places for, I guess, PRC spies to come pick up and get later. So we don't really know much about the details of exactly what kind of information he was feeding back to them or anything. Only updates I could find, it mentioned that in this article, it mentioned that his next trial was for October 2nd. All I could find was that they denied him bail and access to a public defender, which that makes sense. So I don't know. It's interesting. It's interesting that this didn't get more coverage, I thought.
Well, it does happen all the time. It's been happening for 10 years from Wenho Lee, I think, at the nuclear facility. And, you know, that's why a student told me to read the 100-Year Marathon, and I've been reading it. It's very interesting. China has been stealing everything all along and getting away with it. And they have a very careful posture of not offending us because they made this mistake with Russia. By standing up to Russian students, the Russian turned against them. So they decided to play gentle with the United States, and they have carefully been arranging their lies to pacify the United States, to stop us from getting too mad at them while they steal everything, and we'll see where it all goes.
Which made me wonder what's going to happen to this guy after he serves his sentence and gets deported back to China. Probably nothing good.
Well, I don't know, but I know. I don't know if I don't know if they're ruthless enough to punish you just for failure. Maybe they'll.
I'm pretty sure, yes, because it's seen as a betrayal of their post and of the Chinese government. Now, of course, their penalty for getting caught as a foreign spy in their country is pretty much immediate execution. So, who knows?
A hero back in China. I don't know.
Maybe they'll just redeploy him somewhere else.
Yeah, that's what I would think. I mean, he's basically a military officer on a mission that got caught. Eventually, he'll get released, and he's not done anything wrong, I would think. But I don't really know how they see it there.
Right.
Anyway, let's see. That was you here. So we're back up to here. Oh, yeah, the ransomware people. Yeah.
Yeah, the ransomware continues to be in the news.
Yeah.
As hospitals are getting hit, and even though they're getting the decryption keys, they're still paying to restore their networks. Where is the dollar amount? I saw the dollar amount in here.
These guys have been down for 20 days, I guess. Campbell County.
Oh yeah. So I added this article just to keep what's going on. Their last update was on the 7th, so yesterday. They have most other stuff up except for 3 areas: the respiratory therapy, their sleep center, and wellness. So it's taken a couple weeks because they went down to the 20th. So 1, 2. This is their 3rd week.
Yeah.
And they're still not fully up yet.
Yep. That seems quite common. And something, maybe it was last week here, somebody told me that only 40% of the time do you actually get the key from the bad guys when you pay the ransom.
Yeah.
That's annoying.
Yeah.
And yet,
so you pay all that money and you don't even know if you're going to get it.
Yeah. This is clearly huge. And I don't see anybody marketing like some anti-ransomware software that you should all buy right now. This would be the time, I would think. If there is such a thing, people would pay for it right now.
I'm sure there is somebody marketing that as a service.
I'm not seeing it. It ought to be like in the headline.
I'm not seeing it either. The article does point to the thing where we were talking about of having updates, or not updates, backups, and having strong backup regimens. With the problem being that they're costly and time consuming because it takes a while to restore. And it just comes back to what we had said of we need faster backups.
Well,
we need to be able to restore from backups faster.
And what we really need is disaster recovery. And I was thinking about this. I've got a student working at a company who is a startup trying to bring them into compliance and teaching a whole class about compliance. I'm beginning to realize what a massive job it is. The fact is, when you start, everybody just throws up code. Everybody's logging in as root. Everybody's subscribing to all these cloud services. Your stuff is just all over the place. And it is a massive job to get organized and say, let's have a inventory of everything. Let's have all the credentials in one place. Let's make sure everything is backed up. Let's have a testing system. This is like a year-long, multi-year-long, monumental, expensive thing to stop just being a mess of junk sprawled everywhere and get organized. So I have more sympathy for people that aren't ready to do that, but ultimately they do have to do that if they ever want to emerge from like the amateurs that are going to die at any minute to the companies that are going to survive.
It looks like Cisco is marketing a suite of ransomware defense products.
Oh, good.
Which would make sense since most of their customers are massive enterprise.
Yeah.
And would be likely targets.
Well, I guess the DRM solution would do, and it'd be good to if you kind of a good link, send it, and we'll talk about it next week. I'd like to talk about that more. It's really hot. I wrote some ransomware yesterday. I'm going to be giving it to my students because I was going to use real malware, but I said, well, maybe I better not go there. So I wrote some really lame ransomware that doesn't do much harm so they can practice with that. But we definitely all need to practice dealing with ransomware. So anyway, this one I thought was particularly interesting to me. I seem to take this more seriously than most people. 1 year ago, Bloomberg published The Big Hack. It was a giant story claiming that everybody was putting Chinese extra hardware in their devices and hundreds of interviews, and it was all completely fake. And they were left with no explanation of how they published this story that was completely fake. They tried to say that they were trusting one lunatic with a conspiracy theory. Then a student gave a presentation yesterday in my class, and he said they're actually saying that it was a CIA disinformation campaign and they fell for it. But anyway, it was totally fake. And what they did is they never investigated it. They never retracted it. And they took the people in charge and promoted them in a higher position in Bloomberg News. So since then, I've always regarded Bloomberg News as basically the same as InfoWars. They are complete liars. They lie with an outrageous story right in front of you, never retract it, never fix it. And they don't seem to see any problem with this, and neither does everybody else. Everybody else cites Bloomberg. Bloomberg has a single source story that's sensational, and I always think it's probably fake. And so anyway, it's an interesting issue. And
Bloomberg's sort of the modern equivalent of the Weekly World News. If you guys remember the supermarket tabloid that would advertise like alien invasions and stuff like that. Well, that's what Bloomberg reminds me of in 2019.
Well, I feel that way, but the rest of the world seems to take them seriously. They have a huge financial market. People regard them as leaders, and they make their financial decisions based on Bloomberg financial reports. They appear to be taken seriously, like the New York Times, but not by me.
I think it's maybe not a stupid plan to make some financial decisions based on Bloomberg, because in a way that's kind of shrewd when you take into account how many people regard it as a credible news source. The reason that stuff like InfoWars and Bloomberg are so successful with their disinformation campaigns is because they specifically choose stories that are going to be massive clickbait. So in a way, this is sort of a demonstration of the way that fake news can have massive influence on financial markets and everything else, political scenarios, etc.
Yeah, I guess so. I know a similar issue is Forbes. Forbes, I heard on Steve Gibson had completely fake stories, and then I heard people whistleblow and say Forbes is actually just a blog network. Well, they let you in, and you can just post anything right up there as news. It's not reviewed at all. So completely fake conspiracy theories get up there. It's I haven't personally been burned by one, but I've heard I should treat them like Bloomberg is just no more than just some random guy on Twitter tweeting. That's all it means when they put up a news story.
It's funny you mentioned that, because I was just talking to a student about that the other day, and I think that has been more of a recent phenomenon over the last couple of years. I've been watching it kind of erode in credibility, and I think the person that told you that's absolutely right. It's basically a blog at this point.
I saw another one today. It was saying the whole model of cybersecurity is shot. And I looked at it, and all they have is the same thing I've been preaching for years. They noticed that the old model, where you have to try to hike out antivirus and firewall and keep the bad guys out, is over. And now you have to have a zero trust network where you expect bad guys to get in. And now you have monitoring and instant response. So they're making it sound like the whole model is shot when it is not true. The whole model was shot in 2010 with the advanced persistent threat, and we responded, and we have a new model. And this guy didn't get the memo. Anyway.
Interesting. Huh.
Anyway, it's so it's worth knowing, and I think identifying fake news is a big issue these days. So
yeah,
about Hong Kong, and I'll bring them up. So this was very interesting about Fight the Landlord.
Yeah, so that was actually. I kind of messed up my link order, but my last two stories here are related. So this was actually kind of further explanation for my first story that I'd intended to send, which was that one, the China's new cybersecurity program. Now, this is I can't say that I'm shocked, but I am pretty. This is big. So. China is basically implementing a new program that's going to take place if it hasn't already started to be rolled out, where basically nothing's private anymore. And what's interesting about this is that in the past they've been a lot more accommodating towards foreign businesses in their country. They've understood the need for these businesses to use VPNs and to keep some intellectual property, to keep some things secret. That's no more. The government has pretty much asserted that there's going to be no secrets from the government. There's going to be no such thing as intellectual property, no more VPNs allowed, none of that stuff. And the New York Times article that's linked there, the Fight the Landlord one, really sort of explains a lot of what's going on there. And, on the surface, this seems like horrific, because it kind of is, but it also kind of seems to me like, in a lot of ways, how it's always been with the Chinese government, where the biggest companies really are the Chinese government. I mean, they're definitely in cahoots with and probably majority owned. So, This seems like something they would do in their own rational self-interest to keep down the competition.
So we've been going to China and using VPNs there, and the local people use VPNs to get around restrictions. And does it make it sound like we won't be able to do that next year?
Right. So I'm wondering how that's gonna be.
Well, this fits along with that 100 years marathon thing. The guy said all this supposed becoming capitalist and adopting our values is just a pose. They're just playing possum until they get powerful enough, and then they're going to crush you and be totalitarian.
Which makes sense. I mean, and definitely seems consistent with what's going on in Hong Kong right now, and with these articles. I mean, that's what was so interesting to me about this New York Times article.
So are we being somehow tricked into hurting the people by going and participating in DEF CON China? I'd like to think we're somehow promoting a healthy interchange that might limit their harm, but maybe we're somehow being used to legitimize their crazy regime.
I don't know that that's the case. I think that, in a lot of cases, in a lot of ways, one thing that's great about it is that, as far as we know anyway, anyone can go to DEF CON China. And, I think that one of DT's motivations in doing that and setting up an event there was that it would bring this education and bring these resources to everybody. And I'm trying to word this really carefully, but I think that, without getting too granular about it, I guess I should say that I think that in a lot of cases, hackers are the ones who protect freedom and civil rights and stuff like that. And I think that it can be an overall positive thing.
Well, that's a very good argument. I like that. I mean, especially DEF CON crowd like the 2600 crowd are total rebels.
Yeah.
You seem to be the rebellious artistic types. So, yeah, I mean, I like DEF CON China, and I'd like in general to feel like peaceful academic cooperation between nations is what will help defuse tensions. And I would like America and China to just get along and not fight war. And I'd like to imagine a future where, even though China may become more powerful than the U.S., we have some kind of partition of the earth where they get part and we get part. And we don't have to blow the whole thing up.
Right. And I think, too, like the way I see it, like going over to do DEF CON China, to me, sort of feels like the opposite of what Trump is doing, which is trying to instigate more divisiveness. And nobody wins there. I mean, except for the people that are making money off of that divisiveness, which is a select few.
Well, anyway, it's certainly good to know what's going on there, and I'm just not sure what the right move is.
I'm not either. I mean, I think it's interesting too how kind of one of the lines out of this article, which was, it was set up as its own paragraph because it really speaks for itself, but business people who don't get on board risk becoming targets. I think that's 1,000% true, and that's pretty Orwellian.
Oh, yes.
But I mean, they're not officially a capitalist country, so.
And they don't have any concept of intellectual property. And
right.
All right, well, I guess we'll see. I know that's what they want here, and that's what they want in the UK. The UK just freaked out about DNS over HTTPS because they can no longer spy on everything. And they don't want end-to-end encryption here. So our government wants a watered-down version of the same thing.
Australia, I saw an article this morning. Australia wants the Cloud Act to take effect so that U.S. companies, as they get information, whenever their courts ask, we hand over information decrypted.
Well, that would make sense since our government's demanding access to decrypted information. It would be subject to extradition, I guess.
China wants the same thing.
Yeah. Well, I suppose that's on the table. I know we have the 5 Eyes where we share everything.
I wonder how that's going to work with like iMessage on iPhone, since if there's end-to-end encryption. So how No, are they going to have to? I wonder if they're going to have to write a new messaging client or how that's going to work in China.
Well, the big issue is Facebook. They're trying to pressure Facebook to get rid of the end-to-end encryption.
I didn't think that Facebook had end-to-end encryption to begin with.
Yeah, I didn't think they did either.
Well, I thought they did, but I know Elizabeth Warren had a tweet stream just up today claiming that Facebook, Zuckerberg has said he's terrified of Warren and she's the #1 enemy. And she says this is like Trump, where Facebook totally promoted Trump by having paid ads. And she says, since Facebook is against me and Facebook is so influential, and they just adopted a policy to put fake news back on the platform. They decided, oh, it's too much bother to block fake news, so we'll put it back on. She said they did that to promote Trump to prevent me from getting in. So we'll see where it goes.
I mean, I obviously don't trust Facebook to begin with, but I think it's very interesting. I think that they already have some kind of partnership with Tencent. I noticed that when we were in China and I had set up WeChat, there was an option to authenticate with Facebook credentials. And that blew my mind. I was like, whoa, I almost fell off my chair when I saw that because
they don't have access to Facebook in China, do they?
Right, but I clearly had a U.S. phone number.
Oh, okay.
So, I mean, no, they do not have access to Facebook in China. But WeChat is pretty much known as being total spyware. That's what the government uses it for, but everyone uses it. You can't communicate without WeChat. So I just thought it was very interesting that at least in some capacity, they're working with Facebook.
Yeah, yeah. Caitlin just showed us Red Star OS last night, which was bloody hilarious. Filled with spyware, of course, from North Korea.
Yes, she was telling me about that. I mean, and it's just there's going to be more of that. You know, some of the stuff that I was reading surrounding these articles that I submitted basically broke it down in that everything's going to have mandatory spyware, just like Red Star OS. Like the government's got to have backdoors into everything, and it's mandatory.
Yeah.
And also they're building. It's sort of like the the thing that Snowden blew up here with the NSA. What is it? The Spectrum.
Yeah, Prism and stuff. Yeah.
Prism. So basically, they're building something like that with better capabilities to actually parse the data, so that they've got so much labor that it makes sense. You can afford to have like human log readers warehoused going through everything.
Yeah. Well, all right. Any other comments? All right. Well,
no.
Stop the recording. See you folks next week.
Great.